I'm sure we're all familiar with the old adage, to errata is human, but to forgive is divine. And Paizo, I just want to say that we forgive you for taking so long to make flight-based Ancestries more accessible to your player base. Today, we're going to talk about some of the errata announcements from Paizo on today's episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller that is totally not scraping the bottom of the barrel for filler content on this channel. No, really. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome to a discussion of some of the announcements that Paizo has recently made about their errata cycle for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And let me go ahead and get this out of the way up front. Yes, this is a little bit of a filler episode for my channel. As of the time I'm recording this, I still have about a week left in the school year at the high school where I work, and as a result, my recording and editing time is a little bit limited right now. So if I'm being entirely honest, I was actually struggling to find something that would fit in this video slot so I could continue to feed the YouTube algorithm. But this past week, Paizo actually did some announcements about their errata cycle for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and those announcements are interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, they signal the fact that the transition period from the OGL to the Orc license is finally coming to its conclusion, and things are returning to something of a stable norm for Pathfinder 2nd Edition as a game. That in and of itself is a pretty noteworthy conversation, but we can also see in some of the errata announcements that were made some of the directions that Paizo is going, and I think there are some teasers and tidbits about some interesting things for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to talk a little bit about the errata cycle, the announcements that Paizo made, and we're going to take a look at some of the errata that just came out and talk about what it might mean both for Pathfinder 2nd Edition in the near term, but also for the long-term health of the game. And don't worry, as soon as the school year is over, I do have some more significant videos that I have been planning for a while, and I hope to get working on those soon. So yes, I realize errata is not necessarily the most exciting thing to cover on this channel, but I do hope that it at least fills the gap and gives us some fun ideas of things to talk about until we can get to some of those larger projects. Anyways, I will have links to both of the web pages that we are looking at in this video in the video description, so if you're interested in reading the announcement blog or the actual released errata more in depth, both of those will be linked in the video description. You can go down there, check those out. And that does segue pretty nicely into the call to action YouTube stuff. Please remember, if you enjoy content like this, do all of that stuff that helps us support the channel. You can like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. All of those will be linked in the video description. But with all of that out of the way, let's get started. So to start out, I want to take a look at the announcement that was put on the Paizo blog on Friday, May the 17th. It starts out by saying, "Welcome. We are a week out from PaizoCon, and you've got a whole slate of reveals for new stuff to look forward to. Pathfinder Player Core 2, Pathfinder War of Immortals, Pathfinder Howl of the Wild, the list goes on. Allow me to say, as a content creator, here in about a week and a half, I'm probably going to have a lot of stuff I can record videos on. But some of you might be looking back and thinking, sure, all this new stuff is great, but I'd really love some updates and clarifications for some of these books I bought right before the remaster started. And I do think that this is a fair statement. Paizo never intended for the remaster to happen. It was a situation that was kind of forced upon them by the circumstances of the OGL-Crisis. I think Paizo managed that crisis really well, and I think a lot of businesses in the gaming community could learn a lot about good customer relations in how Paizo responded to that whole ordeal. But that doesn't mean that the process hasn't been without its pain points, and one of the notable pain points from that process has been, what about the books that came out before all of this remaster stuff started? If you travel back in time, Paizo actually had a schedule, a systematic approach that they took to Errata for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and there was a pretty reliable schedule about when and how you could expect updates to the game to be provided to the community. Obviously, the remaster means that there are going to be a lot of updates and changes that need to be addressed as we work to adapt existing content to the new Pathfinder 2nd Edition remaster structure. The blog continues, well, good news. We've got a slate of errata for you. Right now, you should find some new entries over at, and they give us a link to the website. We will go and check that out here in a moment. But it notes that it has errata for Guns and Gears, Rage of Elements, Lost Omens Firebrands, and Lost Omens Ancestry Guide. And there's some more in this paragraph, but I'm actually going to jump down to the next paragraph because it talks more about the errata cycle itself, and I think that's what we should cover first. This also marks the beginning of a return to normalcy for us following the flurry of activity around the OGL events of last year and the need for us to pivot to the remaster project and the introduction of the Orc license. With all of that in the rearview mirror and a clear road leading into a bright blue horizon ahead, we're looking to get back on track for the annual errata cycle we had announced right before those plans got altered. As part of the pivot, we want to set some clear expectations for what the future we're working toward is going to look like for FAQs and errata. So this is what I was talking about a moment ago. Before all of the OGL-Crisis started, Paizo had worked to set up a regular systematic approach to how they did FAQs errata for the game Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and the remaster kind of threw all of that out of the window. But now that the gaming community has weathered the storm that was getting the remaster in place, Paizo clearly has the goal of returning to that reliable approach to FAQs and errata, and this blog is the announcement about how that will be handled. First, they talk about hardcover rulebooks. This includes books like Player Core, Guns and Gears, Rage of Elements, etc. Our goal for this product line is for it to receive 2 errata and FAQ cycles per year on an as-needed basis, 1 in the spring/summer and 1 in the fall/winter. This current drop is the spring/summer cycle, so you can expect 1 more errata update before the end of the year. All of this is pretty self-explanatory, but what we see here is Paizo is focusing their errata and FAQ cycle on the hardcover rule books, on what are the mainline products for the Pathfinder 2nd Edition system. So books like the Player Core, Guns and Gears, Rage of Elements, or the new book Howl of the Wild that is dropping this month, these are the main books that people buy into when they're looking at Pathfinder 2nd Edition as a game, and for that reason, the errata and FAQs for those books are the most prominent issues for the Pathfinder community. As such, Paizo is going to drop any necessary errata for these twice a year. Now, you can tell they're giving themselves some flexibility with these very broad spring/summer and winter/fall cycles, but they're still giving themselves 2 windows per year to address what are the most important products in their product line. And you can tell that the emphasis on any errata or FAQ is probably going to be on these books most of the time. We also see the important phrase in here, on an as-needed basis, which basically means Paizo is going to be addressing the most needed issues first for any product. So that doesn't mean that because they did errata for Rage of Elements in this particular drop that they're never going to errata Rage of Elements again. If there are other issues for Rage of Elements that come forward in the future, they can and will be included, and Paizo is going to focus their errata and FAQ efforts on the most pressing or important issues inside of the game. Here in a moment, we're going to talk about some of the changes and assumptions for flying player characters, as one of the major targets in this Errata cycle, and you can tell that basically what Paizo has done here is they have targeted an issue that they thought was very important for the health of the game. The next category is Lost Omens books. This line of books will receive one Errata and FAQ update cycle per year on an as-needed basis, coinciding with one of the two hardcover rulebook cycles. So the Lost Omens line is less of a core product line for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. If you make use of the Pathfinder setting, obviously these books can be very useful for you, but Pathfinder is the kind of game that you could easily adapt to other settings or other locations, and for that reason there are probably a lot of people out there who don't necessarily use the Lost Omens line, and as a result these books are not necessarily as critical to the overall health of the game, so Paizo intends to come back and look at these books about once per year. Finally, they note that their Adventure Path line is a monthly periodical, and the player content produced in it is intended for use with the associated adventures. The standard for player content presented in adventures is that it is of uncommon or rare rarity and directly tied to the story it is presented with. Furthermore, they note, we do not currently have any plans at this time to include adventure content in scheduled Errata cycle. We may still do Errata around particular reprints, such as when compiling an adventure for a hardcover release. So essentially what Paizo is saying here, content that can be found in published adventures is the lowest priority content when it comes to Errata. The assumption behind any content in an adventure is that content is tailored to the adventure and is generally not going to be accessible outside of that adventure. So if you want to include an item or a spell or something else that you found in an adventure path, that is very much something that comes with the tag Game Master Approval Required, and because that is a baseline assumption of published adventure paths, that means Errata for adventures is ultimately very far down on the priority list for Paizo, which I think is very understandable. They give themselves some wiggle room that they can come back in Errata when and if they want to, and especially if they're going to do something like a big compilation of an adventure path. I think we will definitely see Errata happening in circumstances like that, but overall, Paizo has set a very clear schedule and priority for when and how they will do Errata for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. They will have 2 Errata cycles per year. Those Errata cycles are focused primarily on the hardcover rulebooks, and then in one of those cycles each year, the Lost Omens line will also get Errata, and Adventure Path Errata will be happening very infrequently. So that's a look at what the Errata system is, but now let's talk about some of the highlights of the latest round of Errata, going back to earlier in the blog. Some highlights include a broad update to the Ancestry Guide entry for re-standardizing the flight feats of certain Ancestries like Sprites and Strix to bring them more in line with the new standard we've set for Ancestries with inherent flight following the remaster. We've also got a swath of minor updates to combination weapons to align with the new standard set by the swap function of the interact action in the remaster. Those are probably the 2 most significant things that have changed in the latest Errata drop, but that's kind of a picture of the changes they were focused on here, though they do note some much requested clarifications for Rage of Elements. You can see from this paragraph that when Paizo does an Errata cycle, that they're probably going to be focusing their Errata on particular areas or things that they feel are important to improve the overall health of the game. But let's go ahead and take a look at the FAQ page and see some examples of this. So this is the Pathfinder FAQ page, and they also have a link to the Rules Questions forum here. And scrolling down, you can see that they have a ton of Errata and remaster compatibility and just different FAQs, information for a variety of products going back quite some time for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Though understandably, the most recent Errata is going to be nearer to the top. When you come to this page, you can click on one of these arrows and it will open up the information for that particular book and its associated Errata or FAQs. And you can see that for the Rage of Elements, there is a lot of stuff here. It scrolls quite some time. One thing that is worth noting is that the errata is organized by page number. So here you have page 35, page 36, down here page 37, down here pages 42 and 43. When you are looking for errata in these documents, you are looking for them sequentially according to where they appear in the book. That's a fairly simple thing, but it is something you want to be aware of, because if you're trying to scan through these documents and find something, knowing the page number of the information you're looking for will help you find that information much more quickly. Now, as you can see, Rage Developments goes on for quite some time. There's a lot of information. I don't want to dive too deep into everything in the Rage Developments errata. For example, you have stuff like adjustments to the athletic skill for a particular creature in the book. That's not the most interesting thing to talk about. If you really want to dig into the various errata that's in here, you can go through and read and find the information that you're looking for. The information included in the errata and FAQ document is going to vary from extremely minor changes to more significant modifications. A good example of a significant modification in Rage Developments, the spell Glass Shield received several changes. They note that damage was changed to not use your spellcasting ability modifier, which brings the spell Glass Shield in line with other spells in the remaster. They actually removed hit points from the shield and its scaling. You could deep dive all of the reasoning behind that, but essentially what's going on here is the Glass Shield spell creates a glass shield that is intended to break, so having hit points in the spell actually went against the purpose of the spell. And so what ended up happening is they actually just redid the entire cantrip stat block for Glass Shield, and you can read the entire new spell inside of the errata document. Now, one thing that I will say about the errata document, I do not know when information like this is going to be provided to sites like Archives of Nethys or Path Builder, so I don't know when this information will be available to those sources, but it is my understanding that information like this does get incorporated from time to time, so you can expect this to show up at some point with those particular resources. But like I said, with Rage Developments, you can see that there's a ton of stuff here, and we're not going to dig too deep into it. I will note that there is actually already some Howl of the Wild errata. Even though technically that book is not available to the public yet, they've already put a few corrections out there, and I do appreciate that information being available. Probably the most significant thing for Howl of the Wild is some clarifications on the Minotaur's stretching reach, which now just has the stance trait because it already kind of worked like a stance anyways. Looking at some of the more significant errata in this particular cycle, we have Guns and Gears and the Lost Omens Ancestry Guide, so let's take a look at Guns and Gears first. They don't talk about this in the blog, but if you're playing an Inventor, you're probably going to appreciate this. The DC for the flat check required when taking unstable actions has been reduced from 17 to 15. Yes, that's a small thing, but if you're an Inventor, that is also something that you are probably very, very grateful for. Going through here, you can find a lot of clarifications for different types of equipment inside of the book, like the backpack ballista, the repeating crossbow, the lesser, moderate, greater, and major etheric essence disruptors, the magnetic suit, all kinds of different things like that. You can see some updates to different abilities. And in what is one of my favorite errata to Guns and Gears, we have some updates for the Spell Shot, which is an archetype option for the Gunslinger class. Spell Shot now receives some additional feats: Basic Arcana, Basic Wizard Spellcasting, Advanced Arcana, Arcane Breadth, Expert Wizard Spellcasting. You have some improvements to Energy Shot, and the Spell Shot dedication now reads as follows: you cast arcane spells like a wizard, gaining a spellbook with 4 common arcane cantrips of your choice. You gain the Cast a Spell activity. You can prepare 2 cantrips each day from your spellbook. You're trained in the Spell Attack modifier and Spell DC statistics. Your key spellcasting attribute for Spell Shot archetype spells is Intelligence, and they are arcane spells. You become trained in Arcana. I love the Spell Shot archetype, but They really needed to update it, and I am so glad they did this. You see some changes to the capacity trait so that the capacity trait in Guns and Gears matches the capacity trait in the book Treasure Vault. And on page 159, we get some updates for combination weapons and the combination traits and how those things work. Combination weapons combine the functionality of melee and ranged weapons in unique or unusual ways. A combination weapon has a ranged form or usage and a melee weapon form or usage. The weapon table lists the ranged weapon statistics first, and the melee weapon statistics indented beneath, just above the ammunition. You can interact to swap between the melee weapon usage and the ranged weapon usage. However, if your last action was a successful melee strike against a foe using a combination weapon, you can make a ranged strike with the combination weapon against that foe without fully swapping to the ranged weapon usage, firing the ranged weapon just as you hit with the melee attack. In this case, the combination weapon returns to its melee weapon usage after the ranged weapon strike. You have some clarifications about how runes work with combination weapons, and you also get a note that due to their complexity, combination weapons can't have another weapon such as a bayonet or reinforced stock attached to them. All of this has been done to make combination weapons function the same way in both Guns and Gears and Treasure Vault, and while this was certainly a niche of the rules, it's probably good to have some clarity between these two different books about exactly how these types of weapons work. Again, there is a lot more in the Guns and Gear errata that you can go and take a look at, but I want to move on to the Lost Omens Ancestry Guide, where they have some clarifications and where we get a look at what Paizo is doing with flying ancestries inside of the game. First, we have a question: can Nephilim characters take Aasimar or Tiefling feats from this book? The answer is yes. They are subject to the same rarity and GM rulings as normal, and as with any legacy material, there may be some work that needs to be done to get them to line up the way you want them to, but it's completely legit for Nephilim characters to pull from the Lost Omens Ancestry Guide. Then, from there, it begins to take a look at some of the different ancestry feats for sprites and strix, and some of the changes to those feats. First up, you have a set of changes for the sprite, and if I were to scroll down, you'd see a set of changes for the strix as well, but the changes are going to be pretty much the same, so we'll just take a look at the sprite options here. You have changes to the Evanescent Wings feat, you have changes to the Energized Wings feat, and then finally you have changes to the Hero's Wings feat that is present in this book. Now, what are these changes? What is different here? Well, essentially, you can get them earlier. Energized Wings and Hero's Wings are both available much earlier in the game than they previously would have been. In particular, Hero's Wings is now feat 9, meaning that a 9th level sprite can pick up this feat much earlier than they could have, granting them the unlimited power of flight. It is now possible after the remaster for flying ancestries to have full unlimited flight by 9th level. This is a major change in the assumptions of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and honestly, if you ask me, this is a good change. Prior to this point, mid-level characters could have access to temporary flight, but full access to flight was still restricted for exceptionally high-level characters. Paizo is now making the conscious decision to make temporary and full access to flight available significantly earlier in your character's progression, waiting until the last 3 or 4 levels of a 20-level campaign to be able to play a character that can fly without restriction is honestly kind of a feel-bad if it's a major part of your character concept. In fact, if you were to go over and watch the Howl of the Wild review video that I did, I actually noted that Paizo has a discussion about flying PCs and ancestries that use flying rules, and even some discussion of allowing access to full flight far earlier than this inside of the game. Paizo has become more comfortable with the idea of flying PCs as a whole, and that is being reflected in the changes in the Lost Omens Ancestry Guide. Now this is interesting, especially when we think about Pathfinder 2e as a whole, because it reflects the fact that Pathfinder 2e is changing, and I think it's changing because Starfinder 2nd Edition is coming. In Starfinder 2nd Edition, flight is a little bit more accessible to characters because you have crazy technology like jetpacks that people can go out and buy. So the idea of 3D environments in Starfinder 2e is a little more a base assumption of the game, and they actually talk about how in the design of Starfinder, including Starfinder 2e, that one of the big assumptions of the game is everybody has a gun. So the idea that people are flying around doesn't necessarily hinder encounter building because there is a base assumption that almost everyone can react to a flying opponent. One of the things we know about Starfinder 2e is Paizo is developing that game in a way that they intend it to be where you can cross over options from one game to the other if you desire to. And I think that Starfinder 2e's assumptions of access to flying characters means that Paizo has had to rethink flying inside of Pathfinder 2e, but honestly, I think this is a good rethinking. Yes, flying is powerful, but this is also a fantasy game with wizards and fireballs and dragons and other things like that, so early access to flying is not necessarily as disruptive to a game like Pathfinder 2nd Edition as they may have originally assumed when they developed this game. So, by and large, these changes to flying ancestries in the Lost Omens Ancestry Guide, I think they reflect a good direction for the game. Anyways, that's been a quick look about Paizo's announcement about their Errata cycle and their FAQs, as well as a quick glance at some of the changes that have happened in this particular Errata cycle. But the time has come for me to turn the conversation over to you. What questions do you have about Paizo's approach to erratas and FAQs, and are you excited for some of the changes that Paizo has heralded in this particular errata cycle? Also, what are some issues that you think it would be good for Paizo to address in future errata or FAQ cycles? Jump down to the comment section and let me know what you think. And of course, don't forget to do all of that other YouTube stuff. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.